dreams have turned into these sprawling, epic productions, a cast of thousands. I guess it's probably always been like that, but I don't usually take time to try to remember. But I just woke up from one of those. I woke up on the side of a curb where half my body was on the street and the rest was on a sidewalk. I was paralyzed from the neck down, but I turned my head to the right and I saw a naked woman sunning herself on a field of artificial grass. She had really tiny breasts, big nipples, but no breasts really. And she was very thin, and I was looking at her for a while. Made my mouth water a little bit. And the rest of my body started to come back to life as I started to have thoughts about this woman and thoughts about just women, just being with a woman. And that was, I turned away. I started thinking we can't have these thoughts. And I think this is a byproduct of a comment that I unwittingly made to myself last week about the Me Too thing. I mean, we are still allowed to have thoughts, aren't we? But it seems inevitable, it seems unstoppable that they're going to come after that too. They're going to come after your mere thoughts. So I was able to walk, and this, I don't want to go into detail because these other people's dreams are really boring, but it's always so colossal. I'll be standing next to a swimming pool, a public swimming pool with 40 people in it, and everybody's just swimming and happy, and then I turn to my left, and without even moving, the pool disappears, and I'm standing in a small, tiny coffee shop where everybody's hunkered down and cold. And then I turn back to where the pool was a minute ago, and it's a living room where I sit down on the couch and start to watch TV. And the TV turns into a big mouth, and I step into the mouth, and I'm standing inside a whale. Like all the teeth disappear. And if I swim down into the whale's body, I find myself trying to decide which back scratcher I should buy. I'm at a dollar shop or some cheap goods place, chintzy goods, and I'm trying to decide which back scratcher would be best for me, because I want to spend that dollar wisely. And these dreams, these sequences go on, and I don't even want to wake up from them. Today I slept in just for the sake of swimming and flying and soaring and drowning in all these possible scenarios, all these impossible scenarios. I think my mind goes these places during the day, during my conscious hours, but there's so much distraction that I can't capture it. I can't capture that lightning in a bottle. And that is how my brain feels. It feels like an electrical storm, a lightning storm. Tiny lightning, of course, undetectable. When I had the brain MRI, I had a couple of those actually, but the first time I had to get a brain MRI because I was blacking out and I was walking into buildings and walking into traffic, and I think what finally made it the decision for me was when, I don't know, like 20 or 30 seconds of my life just disappeared. I was walking one direction on Queens Boulevard toward, I should remember the street name now. I thought it was Ascot, but I don't think that's right. Alsop, maybe. I was walking that direction, and I saw a couple of elderly women walking my way. And the next thing I knew, I was facing the other direction, and those two elderly women were walking past me, or passing me by. And they were walking very slowly, so I could have been out for longer than I thought. I don't know what happened. I don't know what that was about. But a neurologist sent me to the MRI, which is a pretty mind-bending experience. But after all that, they analyzed every slice, every fatty piece, every drop of fluid, and they went slice by slice, and they just looked at everything as best they could. And for all that, they still couldn't tell me what was going on in there. They said that this brain is unremarkable. And I took fake offense at that, because of course I should be relieved to know that it's unremarkable. But there's another dream I've been having that feels so real. It's like I can't wake up from it, even though I have to, because I don't know. But this one I'm pretty sure comes directly from my job, which I love. And this comes from some of the voices that I let go to my head in the course of this job. In this dream, I choose to move to another apartment, and I know that it's going to be a dump. It's a place where there's a landlord, but nobody cares, and nobody takes care of the place. And I know this when I choose to move here, even though I think it ends up being about the same rent, but I just needed to be in a new place. And I knew it was a dump. I just remember one of the walls is bright red. The floor is like a pukey brown. The other wall is white, but it's stained and has all kinds of spots on it. And the roof looks creaky and peeling. And the living room is a pretty big space, but the bedroom is just about the size of the bed itself. And then there's the kitchen, and in the kitchen I discovered that I accidentally threw like some chicken or meat or something behind the refrigerator, and this attracted a swarm of these insects that I've never seen before. They're not. My first thought was bed bugs, but bed bugs don't fly like these things do, and these things have like little pincers. They look like mini. I don't know what those things are called, lobsters or whatever sea creatures has these two little pincers in front of them. I go back to clean up the chicken or meat that I dumped back there, and this swarm of these things rises up, and it's not like an overwhelming swarm, but it's enough to follow me around and make me feel uncomfortable. And every time they move with me, and as they move, there's a laugh track that sort of articulates or accompanies their physical movements. So their physical movements become a visible rendition of the sound that they're making, or maybe it's the other way around. I don't know, but the more they moved and they started to swarm and move around my head, and there was just this laughter of these creatures that I couldn't identify, and I couldn't tell what their motive really was. I thought of them as like some kind of ants, where those tiny pincers all put together were going to kill me or were going to chop my head off. So I let the meat and the chicken stay back there, and they left me alone. But getting back to reality, or was I ever even there? I spend all day on the phone, and when I come home, I find all I want to do is get back on the phone. Even more than in the past. I've been calling this one set of chatlines for a long time, probably 15 years, maybe even longer than that. And I'm not chronic, I'm not there all constantly, but lately I have been. Most people would probably think they're pretty trashy and ghetto, and I wouldn't disagree. But when the energy there is good, it's really good. It's so much fun. I feel like I'm the only white guy in the whole place, except every once in a while a stampede of white people come in and start dropping the N-bomb all over the place, and basically running everybody out. I don't know why that happens or if there's any purpose behind it or any planning. I don't understand how the lines work, but I'm not trying to understand how it works in terms of what platform do they use or how does people get connected or what the rooms are about. I don't care about that. But that's where I met Crystal, and we had a dalliance. I guess it's been a couple of months now, maybe 3 months. It was very tenuous. It wasn't easy. There was nothing easy about us getting together. She lives in Cypress Hills and has a lot of other stuff going on in her life besides hooking up with white guys on the chat line. But we tried, and she was fun, but just an angry, angry woman. Everything was about race for her. Always I felt like even in our intimate seeming moments, she'd be talking about something racial, or she'd make anything she said, every 2 words just seemed to be about race. And I get it up to a point, but it gets boring and monotonous after a while. It's like she was talking about an ex. I don't know. We had some fun and all that, but I guess we just ghosted each other. And that's fine. I haven't heard her. I haven't found her on the chat line since either. She said she'd been calling for a long time, but I never heard her before. And that's another aspect of the line I don't really understand. The women that are there seem to take all this abuse from the other men, but they just sit there and take it. And I strongly suspect it's because they're getting paid to be there. But I didn't ask Crystal about any of that shit because I don't want to know. But those lines were really a voice for me during the lockdown and the pandemic. I rarely have said anything, but I've been lifting my voice lately, so I feel a little more confident. And in this crowd, I tell people I work. I tell people I have a job, and that makes me quite a catch in this crowd. But I don't mean to flatter myself with any of that. It's just I'm trying to figure out where I fit in all these folks, because I don't know who I'm talking to. I don't know who they are. They're all over the country. Somebody was from LA. I think somebody said she was from an island somewhere, but I couldn't figure out where she was calling from. And there's plenty of people from New York too. But I've been revisiting that stuff with a little more focus, because I feel like there's something for me there. Maybe it's not something good, but there's something for me there. See, these lines that I call there's not much been written about them, but the story is that they were totally free to call because of the way they exploited an FCC loophole. That they set up a phone company, or they made an arrangement with a phone company in like rural Iowa or Minnesota or like Nebraska. It's these places with small phone companies that, through an FCC subsidy, the big phone companies basically subsidized those carriers with something called, I can't even remember what it's called now. I try to forget this kind of stuff now because I've tried to move on from the nuts and bolts and the technical code and all that shit. But basically the big phone companies subsidized the small ones in these remote areas, which seemed only fair because it was expensive to maintain those copper lines out there. With so little call volume, they weren't really making money from their actual customers to survive. So the big telcos subsidized the tiny ones. And this created this loophole where all calls that were going through these little telcos were being subsidized, and so they just started routing millions and millions of calls through these tiny telcos, and the big ones, the big companies were paying for it, and people were making millions on that through these tiny companies. So that's how these chat lines that I've been connecting to remained free, and it's also how free conference call has remained free. They exploited that loophole to the umpteenth power. Somehow they all still survive, though. Like these chat lines I keep calling have injected some short ads, but they don't play them very often. I don't find them offensive at all. I'm not an anti-advertising type. But they have been injecting ads, but they're really strange. Like the ads are from 2 years ago, and they don't seem to do anything. They don't seem to work if you press 1 for more information or whatever they say. I'm not sure how Free Conference Call is surviving, but they do have a lot of paid extras. Anyway, what my point being about these chat lines is that their existence was somewhat controversial, and there was some bad shit that happened with respect to people doxing themselves and getting murdered or stalked or harassed by people that they met or encountered on these chat lines. So I have a way of being kind of an open book about who I am and my identity and everything, but I'm being careful about that because there are some bad people on these lines. There really are. I've detected that I've encountered some of them already. I mean, I've been calling these lines for a long time, but the last, I don't know, few months, I've really tried to make myself a presence there. I think I freaked a couple of people out with comments about my emotional triggers and how I get triggered by certain things. I mean, maybe we all do and don't realize it, but I started to feel some of these women were like wanting to get to know me better, and I'm just being careful about that. I'm surprised I let the one woman happen, but she, like I said, she was angry and everything, but ultimately harmless. I'm going to read something that it appears I wrote this in 2008, though it sounds like it might be a little earlier than that, but it doesn't matter. It's a story about one of the many women that I've chatted with online for hours and hours and hours, but never met in person. It's just a game some people like to play. And I used to be hurt by that, or even offended, but I've just come to expect that what happens in a chat window happens in a chat window, and that's the end of that. So I guess I'll just read this straight as is, even though some of this isn't really true anymore. Some of my behaviors that I describe aren't really true anymore. One of the first people I ever talked to via online communication was a woman who called herself Annie Oakley. I recognized the name, but was unfamiliar with that for which Annie Oakley was known, and thus our conversations began. "Who was Annie Oakley?" I typed to her. She quickly replied that Oakley was a famous sharpshooter from Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. From there, our conversations traveled to far and sometimes crazy places. I never knew her real name, but Annie first turned me on to New Orleans music and Zydeco. I encouraged her to read the poetry of Carol Musk. I doubt if Annie remembers me now, but I think of her anytime I see my Dr. John CDs. And when I spot my Carol Musk books, I like to imagine that the connection endures between her and my recommendation of that poet. The Musk book I was reading at the time was Skylight, and during the course of our frequent conversations with Annie, I got a copy of the then current Red Trousseau, published in 1993. It was marked down from $18 to $2.50 by August of that year. Wow. I bought Skylight used, probably at the Strand bookstore. The title page is signed by the previous owner, though the name is hard to make out. R. Haven, I think. Richie Havens. Hey, why not? Under Richie Havens' autograph is written 1982, presumably the year he obtained the book. I have never followed that custom of signing and dating books when I purchased them. My mother did. Almost all the books on our shelves contain some handwritten note recording when and where the book was purchased. Most of the Chopin piano music scores in my collection came from my mother. She bought the scores in Poland during the 1960s. And her Paderewski edition of the Chopin concertos is signed Warsaw, Poland, 1966. Having, as a child, grown up with this custom of signing and dating purchased books, I can't really explain why I never do this myself. It may be connected to the piano playing portion of my life. In that corner of my experience, I find it unacceptable to write on scores and to defile their pages with my insipid residue. I got this attitude, or I was guided toward this attitude when a teacher told me that Rudolf Serkin, the great pedagogue, forbade his students to write fingerings or other indications onto their scores. "If you want to learn it, you will learn it," was the paraphrased wisdom that traveled from Serkin's vaunted studio to mine. I must have been predisposed toward this hands-off attitude already, for I only had to hear it once before never writing on a score again, not even to make corrections to misprints or typos. Similarly, I never write on other published books, including poetry or literature. My copy of Skylight has a few scribblings on its pages, with some notes in the margins and large brackets calling out passages that the book's previous owner found remarkable. The word "ugh" is bracketed to a few lines from the title poem of the book, while my favorite poems from this volume escape unscathed from the previous owner's critiques. For Annie Oakley one night, I typed out the complete poem "Chivalry," one line at a time, into our shared chat window. I liked sharing or experiencing poetry that way, with one line at a time ascending up the screen, drifting out of the chat window into who knows where. It is similarly spare as when it is on the printed page, but more alive. It beats hearing a poet read their own poetry. That's a celebrity ritual that makes little sense to me, or to we who think words live on the page, or, as a convenience, on the screen. But I'll read the poem now. This is Chivalry by Karl Musk. In Benares, the holiest city on earth, I saw an old man toiling up the stone steps to the ghat, his dead wife in his arms, shrunken to the size of a child, lashed to a stretcher. The sky filled with crows. He held her up for a moment, then placed her in the flames. In my time on earth, I have seen few acts of true chivalry or reverence of man for a woman. But the memory of him, with her in the cradle of his arms, placing her just so in the fire so she would burn faster, so the kindling of the stretcher would catch, is enough for me now. Will suffice for what remains on this earth, a gesture of bereavement in the familiar carnage of love. Now, as I read that poem now, I remembered having it memorized, and I almost rememorize it again. Annie and I agreed that Carnage of Love from the last line sounded like the title of a heavy metal song, but we liked the poem anyway. I never told Annie then, but I would not lie about it now. I picked up the book in the first place because of the author's photo on the back. She was beautiful. Carol's eyes are haunted and still, but I would not have bought the book only on those grounds. I opened the book right to chivalry, then read some other pages and made the purchase. The book was $1, which at the time was not an amount of money I spent frivolously. I don't know how much time passed between that purchase of Red Trousseau, but I looked for Karl Musk's picture on the latter book. She seemed different, still beautiful, but happier seeming. She is comfortably set under the words, "A master poet at the peak of her craft." Annie and I never met, as became typical of women I chat with for weeks and months on end. Most women I meet online would rather keep me online, playing games inside a little chat window. Annie might be alarmed to know that I remember her at all, but I would hope otherwise. Karl Musk is now Carol Musk Dukes and was recently named the Poet Laureate of California.